In the small, dust-choked town of San Hollow, silence was the rule, and fear was the law. Harvey Dalton, the man who owned the land, the wages, and the very breath of the people, had long ruled with an iron fist. No one dared defy him, until the day a little girl named Lily was tied to a post in the town square, accused of stealing eggs to satisfy her hunger. The townsfolk stood frozen, torn between compassion and terror, knowing that to speak meant ruin. And then, from the edge of the crowd, came a sound no one expected. A German shepherd's growl. His name was Rex, a retired police dog who had once served with honor. Without command, without hesitation, he stepped between Lily and Dalton's wrath. What happened next would set off a chain of events that changed San Hollow forever. A battle not of fists and guns, but of loyalty, truth, and courage. This is the story of a dog who refused to bow, a town that remembered its voice, and a child who carried the hope of the silenced. The limousine glided along the narrow coastal road, its black frame shining like polished obsidian under the morning sun. Beyond the tinted windows stretched the wild beauty of the American shoreline. Jagged cliffs, untamed waves, gulls shrieking as if warning the land of secrets buried in the surf. The sea was restless that morning, hurling itself against rock and sand, as though unwilling to be tamed, even by the wealthiest who came to build their glass mansions above its fury. Inside the car, Ethan Montgomery leaned back against the leather seat, his gaze fixed on the horizon. At 45, the salt in his hair matched the ocean's froth, but the sharp angles of his jaw betrayed a man still clinging to power, control, and appearances. His hand rested against his knee, though his fingers tapped nervously, a rhythm out of sync with the car's smooth motion. Beside him sat Veronica, young, radiant, and visibly pregnant, her silk dress draped carefully to emphasize the gentle swell of her stomach. She looked like a figure painted into a life of privilege, but her eyes, cool and calculating, gave off a gleam that unsettled more than comforted. On the opposite seat, 3 small figures pressed their foreheads to the glass: Lily, Grace, and Hope. Identical in their curls of chestnut hair, identical in the innocent wideness of their blue eyes. They had never seen the ocean before. Their gasps filled the car, their breath fogging the glass, as they pointed with tiny fingers at the endless expanse of blue. "Look, Daddy! Look at the water!" Lily cried. Grace clapped her hands, and Hope whispered as if confessing a dream. "It's so big, like the sky fell down." For a moment, Ethan's chest softened. Memories stirred. The first time he'd held them, impossibly small and fragile, all swaddled in hospital blankets. Back then, he'd promised himself he would protect them from everything: the cruelty of the world, the mistakes of his own past, even his own weakness. That promise flickered in him now, alive but fragile, like a candle threatened by the sea wind. The car slowed as iron gates appeared, tall, black, and adorned with a crest that few knew and fewer cared about. The driver stepped out, his gloved hand opening the door to reveal the villa beyond. The mansion sprawled across the cliffside like a conqueror staking claim to the land. Marble terraces caught the sunlight in blinding gleams. Glass walls reflected the ocean's turbulence. Palm trees bent beneath the gusts, as if bowing before human ambition. The triplets tumbled out first, their laughter carried away by the wind. They ran across the stone driveway, their shoes clattering, their small dresses ballooning. They looked like birds freed from a cage, chasing seagulls without knowing that the world could turn on them in an instant. Ethan followed slowly, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel. Veronica emerged last, sliding her sunglasses onto her face, the picture of a woman born to be admired. She tilted her chin up, gazing at the mansion, as if she were the true owner of it all. One hand rested on her belly, the other lightly grazing Ethan's arm, a gesture that looked tender, but tightened like a claim. From the terrace, the view was overwhelming. Waves clawed at the rocks below, foam spraying high enough to catch the morning light like shattered glass. To the children, it was magic. To Ethan, it was a reminder nature was not easily controlled. "Daddy, can we play pirates?" Grace asked, pulling at his hand. Her eyes glistened with wonder. "We can build castles in the sand," Lily added. Hope was already crouched near the steps, tracing patterns in the dust with her finger. Ethan managed a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, my princesses. Later. First, let's get settled inside." Inside, the villa was colder than the sunlit exterior suggested. High ceilings swallowed sound, chandeliers glimmered without warmth, and expensive art watched from the walls like silent judges. Veronica walked ahead, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "It's perfect," she murmured, surveying the grand staircase, the gilded mirrors, the heavy drapes. To her, this wasn't just a vacation home. It was a stage. And on this stage, she intended to play her role to perfection. The children darted between rooms, their giggles echoing through the hollow spaces. Ethan stood in the middle of the hall, a strange hollowness rising in his chest. He told himself it was exhaustion from the drive, but deep down, he knew it was dread. When he looked at Veronica, he found her watching him. Her sunglasses now dangled from her fingers, her expression sharp as a blade honed for one purpose. She offered him a smile, but it wasn't the smile of love. It was the smile of victory, of someone who already knew the choice he would be forced to make. Outside, the triplets pressed their faces against the wide glass windows, staring once more at the ocean. The waves thundered below, constant, merciless. To them, the sea was freedom. To Ethan, it was beginning to look like a grave. And so began the illusion of a perfect family. A husband, a young wife, 3 daughters, and the promise of a son. To outsiders, it would seem like the portrait of happiness, painted in wealth and sunlight. But beneath it, the brushstrokes were already cracking. Shadows lingered where no one wanted to look. Ethan's heart pounded with a truth he couldn't yet say aloud. This villa, this ocean, this week, it would change everything. The villa was a cathedral of wealth, yet when night fell, it felt more like a cavern. Shadows stretched long across the marble floor, flickering in the soft glow of 100 candles lit for ambiance. The waves outside pounded against the cliffs, muffled but insistent, like the heartbeat of some restless creature. Ethan sat at the dining table, untouched wine trembling in the stem of his glass. Across from him, Veronica reclined with deliberate grace, the candles painting her in soft gold. Her features were beautiful, in the way that could silence a room. Poised cheekbones, deliberate lips curved as though they always knew a secret. Her hand rested protectively over her stomach, fingertips drumming with a rhythm that seemed calculated. The triplets were asleep upstairs, their soft laughter still echoing faintly in Ethan's ears. Hours earlier, they had run barefoot across the marble, giggling about seashells and pirate ships. Now the silence of the villa weighed on him. He could almost hear their breaths in memory, the way each of them as newborns had fit into the crook of his arm, Lily's tiny fingers gripping his thumb, Grace's sleepy murmur against his chest. Hope's first cry that had broken him with its fragile demand to live. But tonight, those memories warred against the woman before him. "Ethan." Veronica's voice slipped into the air, smooth but sharpened. "We cannot keep pretending. You know what must be done." He looked up, his jaw tightening. "What do you mean?" Her smile was faint, brittle. "Don't insult me with hesitation. You've seen it. The way people look at us. 3 daughters from another woman trailing at your feet, while I carry the heir, your son. Do you not see the imbalance? Do you not see what it makes us look like?" Ethan swallowed hard. The wine burned down his throat, though he hadn't even taken a sip. "They're children, Veronica. My children." "They didn't ask for—" She cut him off with a sharp tilt of her chin. "And I didn't ask to live in their shadow." The words hung in the air like smoke. Ethan's hand trembled against the table. He had always known Veronica's dislike for the triplets. The way her lips tightened when they called him Daddy, with unfiltered joy. The way her eyes narrowed when his arms opened to embrace them. But this was different. There was no pretense now. Her disdain had hardened into demand. "Veronica," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "They are innocent." Her eyes gleamed with something colder than the ocean outside. "Innocence means nothing in a world that chooses heirs. I will not raise my son in a home where he is outnumbered, unwanted, and overshadowed. Either they go, or I do." The room seemed to shrink around him, every candle suddenly casting accusing light. He stared at her, disbelief clawing at his chest. "You'd walk away." "After everything?" "I'd do more than walk away," she murmured, her voice soft but lethal. "If you choose them, Ethan, I end this pregnancy. Tonight. Don't think I won't." The words gutted him. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he thought his heart might tear itself in two. He saw flashes in his mind. Veronica's glowing smile when she told him she was carrying his child, his hand trembling as he touched her belly for the first time, imagining a boy who would bear his name. But then, another memory forced its way in. The hospital room years ago. 3 small bundles swaddled and placed in his arms, one after another. His heart had nearly exploded then, not from fear, but from awe. "Daddy," he had whispered to no one, too overcome by the miracle of it all. Now that same heart beat like a prisoner, trapped between past and present. Veronica leaned forward, candlelight carving her face into angles of beauty and cruelty alike. "Do you want to lose me, Ethan? Lose us? The future I can give you? Or do you want to cling to 3 reminders of a woman who is long gone?" Her words were deliberate daggers. Margaret, his late wife, the woman who had given him the triplets, and then slipped away too soon. Veronica's voice carried a venom that struck directly at that wound. Ethan's hands pressed against his temples, his breath coming ragged. He felt the room tilt, though he knew it wasn't the house that swayed. It was his own soul. The cries of his daughters, as infants, seemed to rise from the shadows, echoing against the crashing sea. But Veronica's whisper, sharp as glass, overpowered them. "Choose me and our son," she said, each word dripping poison. "Or choose them and lose everything." Silence stretched between them. The ocean roared and the flames crackled. Ethan's eyes burned, though no tears fell. He had built empires, signed contracts worth millions, bent rivals to their knees. Yet here, in front of this woman, he was stripped to nothing more than a man who could not carry both loves at once. His mouth opened, but no words came. His chest rose and fell, heavy with the weight of a decision he wasn't ready to make. His eyes flicked toward the staircase, where above them 3 little girls dreamed without knowing their father's heart was being carved apart below. Veronica leaned back at last, a satisfied curve at her lips. She could see his hesitation bending him like a reed in the wind. "Think carefully, Ethan," she whispered, her hand smoothing over the curve of her belly. "By dawn, you'll know what must be done." The candles sputtered as if recoiling from her words. Ethan closed his eyes, drowning in memories. Grace's voice asking, "Daddy, are we still your princesses?" And Veronica's cold ultimatum overlapping it, "Choose me or them." The villa seemed to breathe around him, its silence pressing down until it was unbearable. He clenched his fists, but even the pressure of his own grip could not anchor him. Above, a small sound drifted from the nursery, the faint, innocent giggle of a child stirring in her sleep. The sound stabbed him with unbearable tenderness. For one flicker of a moment, he thought he might rise, climb those stairs, and declare his choice aloud. But then he saw Veronica's eyes, patient, unblinking, merciless, and he knew the battle was only beginning. The night had left Ethan hollow. He had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw 2 visions warring behind his lids. One, the triplets, their arms wrapped around his neck, their small voices echoing, "Daddy, don't leave us." The other, Veronica, her face carved in candlelight, hand stroking her belly like a queen, reminding him of his duty to the crown. By morning, the villa seemed brighter, yet crueler. Sunlight cut through the glass walls in sharp beams, striking marble floors that felt as cold as ever. Ethan sat at the edge of the terrace, staring at the ocean with bloodshot eyes. The waves crashed in relentless rhythm, reminding him of inevitability. He had always admired the sea's freedom. Now it mocked him with its vastness, its ability to swallow secrets whole. Behind him, Veronica's footsteps whispered across the tiles. She came into the light with practiced grace, her silk robe trailing. The smile on her lips was as thin as glass. "You look tired," she said, though her tone lacked concern. He didn't answer. His hands gripped the railing until his knuckles whitened. Veronica stepped closer, her perfume invading his air. She rested her palm against his back, a gesture that might appear affectionate to an outsider, but Ethan felt the pressure of it like a push toward the cliff. "They adore you," she said lightly. "And they'll adore you still, even in a game." His head turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "Game?" Her smile widened, brittle, gleaming with cruelty hidden beneath playfulness. "Children love stories, pirates, adventures, ships sailing into the unknown. What if we made them believe they were going on such an adventure?" Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to reject the thought before it rooted itself. But his voice betrayed him. It emerged cracked and weak. "You mean—" "I mean," Veronica interrupted smoothly, "there is no need for tears, no need for struggle. You simply play along. Build them a raft, something that looks like a toy, a vessel for their little adventure. Tell them they're pirates, explorers of the 7 seas. They'll laugh, they'll cheer, and when the tide carries them away, it won't be betrayal they remember, only a game their father made special for them." The words struck like knives. Ethan flinched, his breath jagged. "They'll die, Veronica," he rasped. "Don't you see? They'll drown." Her gaze, cold and steady, met his. "Or they'll live. Perhaps the sea will claim them, perhaps it won't. But what matters is that they will not remain here. Not between us, not between me and our son. Silence consumed the terrace. A gull cried overhead, harsh and grating, before vanishing into the horizon. Ethan felt as if he were breaking apart. His mind clung to fragments of memory. Lily's sleepy question, "Are we still your princesses?" Grace's hand reaching for his, sticky with jam. Hope's laughter, bubbling like music when he swung her in the garden. These were not obstacles. They were his blood, his very marrow, and yet Veronica's eyes pinned him. "You know I'll keep my word," she whispered, her voice venom wrapped in silk. "If they stay, I end this pregnancy. You'll lose me. And him. Him. The son he had imagined. The heir he had never thought he would have again. The dream that seemed to hold the last pieces of his future." Ethan's body trembled. He nodded faintly, though the motion made bile rise in his throat. Veronica's smile was victory itself. She kissed his cheek, ice against fire, and whispered, "Then prepare. They'll play their game tomorrow." The hours that followed blurred into a haze of guilt. Ethan found himself in the villa's garage, the scent of gasoline and salt air mingling until it choked him. Tools clattered as he searched for planks, ropes, barrels. His hands moved mechanically, each gesture heavy with betrayal. He hammered wood together, the thuds echoing like gunshots in the cavernous space. His hands shook so violently he nearly split his thumb more than once. He bound plastic barrels beneath the planks with rope, every knot tightening the noose around his own soul. Sweat trickled down his temples, despite the cool morning. When at last the raft took shape, it looked absurdly small, laughably fragile. It would never withstand the ocean's fury. Yet, in its crooked form, it resembled something a child might believe in. A vessel for play, a toy made by their father. Ethan stared at it, his breath shallow. His reflection glimmered in the glossy surface of a barrel, and he barely recognized the man staring back. Hollow eyes, trembling lips, a smile forced and empty. That night, as the sun bled red into the sea, Ethan dragged the raft closer to the shore. Each scrape against the ground sounded like a scream. He paused often, glancing back at the villa, half hoping Veronica would call out, half praying she wouldn't. From the terrace above, she stood silently, her silhouette framed by fading light. Her hand rested on her belly, her expression unreadable, except for the certainty in her stillness. Ethan forced the raft into the sand, his shoulders sagging under invisible weight. He stepped back, his breath hitching. It was ready. The stage was set. Tomorrow, he would smile for his daughters. Tomorrow, he would lead them to the water's edge. Tomorrow, he would betray the very promise he had made when he first held them. As the ocean roared in approval, Ethan whispered to the night, though no one could hear, "Forgive me." But even as the words left his lips, he knew forgiveness was a shore he might never reach. Morning came with a sky of soft blue and gulls sweeping across the horizon, their cries sharp against the steady pulse of the sea. The beach below the Montgomery villa shimmered in the early light, a stretch of pale sand that curved between cliffs like a secret kept by the ocean. For the triplets, it was paradise. Lily, Grace, and Hope raced barefoot down the steps, their dresses fluttering, their laughter spilling into the salt air. Their tiny feet left scattered imprints in the sand, quickly erased by the licking waves. "Look!" "Seashells!" Lily squealed, crouching down to gather a handful, her palms overflowing with pink and ivory fragments. Hope dropped to her knees, pressing shells into the sand as decorations for the castle she had already begun. Grace, the tallest by barely an inch, stood with arms spread wide, singing a nursery rhyme their late mother used to hum. Her voice was small, but the wind carried it like a hymn. The three of them worked together with earnest determination. Buckets filled with wet sand became turrets. Driftwood sticks turned into flags. Each time a wave crept too close, they shrieked with delight and scrambled back, only to rush forward again, daring the ocean to catch their fortress. Their cheeks flushed, their curls tangled with salt and wind. They looked like sprites of the shore, creatures born from foam and sunlight. From the terrace above, Ethan watched. His hands gripped the railing as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. To anyone else, the scene below would have been idyllic. 3 daughters laughing freely, a father surveying his kingdom, wealth and beauty surrounding them all. But to Ethan, it was unbearable. Every peal of their laughter struck him like a bell tolling doom. Every grain of sand they touched reminded him of the plan forming like rot inside the house he had built. He descended slowly, his shoes crunching on the wooden steps. By the time he reached the sand, the triplets were already clamoring around him. "Daddy, look!" Lily held up a shell shaped like a heart. Hope tugged at his sleeve, pointing at the crooked castle she and her sisters had built. Grace wrapped her arms around his leg, her eyes shining. He forced a smile, but it was thin and hollow. His eyes, no matter how he tried, betrayed him. The children noticed. They always noticed. Grace tilted her head, studying him with the seriousness only a child can carry. She stepped back, her small hands twisting together. "Daddy," she asked softly, "are we still your princesses?" The words pierced him. For a moment, the world stilled. The sea seemed to hush, the gulls retreating to silence. Ethan's throat constricted. His chest felt as though it had been cleaved open. He crouched down, eye level with his daughters, the 3 of them blinking at him with innocent expectation. He wanted to tell them yes, louder than the waves, firmer than the rocks, eternal as the tide. He wanted to sweep them into his arms and promise they would always be his, that no one, not even Veronica, could strip that truth away. But when his mouth opened, all that came was a whisper. "Of course you are." The words felt like ash. He tried to smile again, but Grace's eyes lingered on his face as though she saw the cracks forming behind his expression. She pressed her cheek to his shoulder and said nothing more, but the weight of her silence was heavier than any accusation. The girls soon returned to their play, their laughter chasing each other across the shore. They sang nursery songs, mispronouncing half the words, clapping their sandy hands in rhythm. Hope declared herself captain of the castle. Lily appointed herself keeper of shells, and Grace, in her quiet wisdom, claimed the role of watcher of the sea. Ethan sat on a driftwood log, watching them. His hands trembled in his lap, his hollow smile plastered like a mask. The sight of them filled him with a love so fierce it hurt to breathe. And yet beneath that love coiled the memory of Veronica's whisper, "Choose me and our son, or them." Each time the triplets called, "Daddy, look at me." His heart lurched. Each time their little arms reached for him, his mind screamed to hold on, never let go. But his body was heavy with dread, chained by the plan he had already set in motion. Behind him, high on the terrace, Veronica stood in her pale gown, one hand resting on her belly. From that distance, her expression could not be read, but Ethan could feel her gaze, sharp as a blade against his back. She did not need to speak. Her presence alone was reminder enough. The triplets, oblivious, danced in the surf. Their voices rang out in song, Their castles rose and fell with the tide. Their joy was pure as sunlight. They trusted without question, loved without fear. And Ethan, sitting among the ruins of his own soul, could do nothing but watch. A father torn between love and betrayal. A man too weak to rise against the storm building in his own house. When Grace looked back once more, her eyes lingered on him longer than the others. She did not ask again, but the question remained suspended between them, as constant as the sea. "Are we still your princesses?" Ethan bowed his head, unable to meet her gaze. The waves roared louder, drowning the silence he could not answer. The sun climbed higher, pouring gold across the restless sea. The tide tugged at the sand like an impatient hand, erasing the castles the girls had built earlier. Hope squealed when the waves swallowed her tallest tower, then burst into laughter as though it were all part of the fun. Lily scooped shells into her dress, declaring she would trade them for treasure. Grace sat cross-legged, watching the horizon, her small brow furrowed, as if she sensed the ocean held secrets too vast to name. Ethan stood a few feet away, his shoulders heavy as stone. The raft he had labored over lay hidden just beyond the dunes, concealed under a canvas. Every thud of his heart reminded him of what it meant and what it would take from him. He drew in a breath that tasted of salt and regret, then forced a smile as he approached his daughters. "Girls," he called, his voice carrying over the rush of the surf. They turned as one, sand clinging to their hands and knees, eyes shining in expectation. "Today," he said, crouching to their level, "you'll sail the 7 seas." The words felt like ash in his mouth, but to them, it was magic. Lily's eyes widened. "Sail? Like real pirates?" Hope clapped her sandy palms together. "Do we get a ship?" Grace tilted her head, studying his face, as though trying to read the truth behind his smile. "Yes," Ethan whispered, forcing a laugh that rang hollow in his own ears. "A ship, just for you. You'll be brave captains, explorers. The sea is waiting." Their joy burst out in shrieks and giggles. They twirled in the sand, arms outstretched, shouting pirate chants they had half remembered from storybooks. Hope grabbed a stick and waved it like a sword. Lily declared herself Captain Lily the Fearless. Grace, quieter, whispered, "Then I'll be the lookout." Ethan's smile faltered. "Lookout." The word sliced him. She was always the one who noticed. The sadness in his eyes, the tremor in his voice. He prayed she wouldn't notice now. He led them up the shore, his steps dragging though the girls bounced ahead. The raft waited under its covering, its crude frame bound by rope and barrels. To adult eyes, it was nothing more than a fragile construction, barely fit to float. But to children, it could be anything. A ship, a fortress, a doorway to adventure. Ethan pulled away the canvas. "Here it is," he announced, his voice steady only through force of will. "Your vessel." The girls gasped in awe. Hope rushed forward, patting the barrels as though they were polished wood. "It's perfect," Lily cried, already climbing onto the planks. Grace hung back, her small fingers twisting in the hem of her dress. She looked from the raft to her father's face. For a heartbeat, Ethan feared she would see the lie. But then she nodded slowly and whispered, "It's like the stories." They scrambled aboard, wobbling as the raft shifted slightly in the sand. Their laughter rang out again, high and unbroken, innocent as birdsong. Ethan steadied the frame, his hands trembling against the wood. His daughters clapped in rhythm, chanting, "7 seas! 7 seas!" From the terrace above, a silent figure watched. Veronica leaned against the railing, her silk gown fluttering in the sea breeze. Her hand rested firmly on her belly, a gesture both protective and possessive. Her face was unreadable, but her stillness was loud. She did not call out encouragement. She did not wave to the girls. She only stood there, an audience to a performance she had written. Ethan's chest burned. He wanted to shout at her, to tear the raft apart with his bare hands, to gather his daughters in his arms and run far from the cliffs and the ocean and her. But the memory of her whispered threat chained him tighter than rope ever could. Choose me and our son, or them. "Daddy, push us," Lily cried, bouncing in excitement. "Yes, let's sail," Hope echoed. Grace clutched the edge, her eyes flicking to him. "You'll come too, right?" The words froze him. For an instant the world held still. The gulls circling, the waves rising, Veronica's shadow on the terrace. Ethan's mouth opened, but his throat locked. He managed only a weak smile, one that felt carved from stone. "You'll be fine, my princesses," he said. "The sea will take you on an adventure." They cheered, unaware of the weight behind his voice. They saw only a game, a gift from their father. Ethan's hands gripped the raft. His knuckles whitened. His heart thundered. Above him, Veronica's hand pressed harder against her stomach, her silent command clear. With every fiber of his being screaming, "No," Ethan whispered, "Ready?" "Ready," the girls chorused, their laughter spilling into the air like sunlight. And as the tide crept closer, licking the sand beneath the raft, Ethan knew the moment of betrayal was almost here. The tide had risen, curling its fingers across the sand, beckoning like a patient predator. Foam hissed and retreated, only to surge forward again, hungrier each time. The raft creaked where it rested, its barrels shuddering as the waves nipped at its edges. The triplets sat perched on top of it, faces glowing, eyes wide with delight. Lily clutched her bucket of shells like treasure. Hope waved her stick sword high, and Grace sat cross-legged near the front, gazing at the horizon with a strange solemnity for a 3-year-old. Their small voices carried through the salt air, singing fragments of songs and rhymes. Ethan stood in the shallows, his shoes soaked, his trousers clinging wet against his legs. His hands gripped the frame of the raft, holding it steady as the water tugged. The ocean roared louder now, as though it knew what was being asked of him. "Daddy," Lily chirped, leaning forward. "Come with us." "Yes, Daddy," Hope shouted, her curls bouncing in the wind. "We're pirates together." Grace's voice, quieter but piercing, cut through them both. "You'll come too, won't you?" The words shattered him. His chest burned with a grief so fierce it felt like fire. He opened his mouth, but no promise would come. His throat locked around the truth, choking him silent. From the terrace above, Veronica's presence bore down on him like a shadow. She had not moved, but her hand clutched his arm now, icy fingers wrapping around his sleeve. At some point, she had descended the steps and come beside him, her silk gown brushing the wet sand. Her grip was sharp, nails biting into his flesh. Her whisper cut against his ear. "Don't falter. Do it." Ethan's body trembled. His hands pressed against the wood, knuckles white, veins straining. He thought of Margaret, his first wife, gone too soon, the day she had placed the triplets in his arms. He thought of how tiny they had been, how fiercely he had promised to protect them. He thought of nights spent pacing the nursery floor, singing lullabies until their cries softened. "They are my heart," he told himself. "My whole heart." And yet here he was, standing at the edge of the sea, preparing to give them to the waves. The girls leaned toward him, their laughter pure, untainted by the truth. "Push us, Daddy," Hope shouted. "Let us go on our adventure." He shook his head, his lips trembling. He couldn't let go. His arms froze. But Veronica's grip tightened, her nails digging through his sleeve, into his skin. Her voice was cold steel. "Do it, or lose us both." Me. The boy. Ethan's knees buckled. His breath came ragged. He felt the world blur around him. The cries of the gulls, the roar of the waves, the warmth of the little faces turned up to him, waiting, trusting. With a strangled cry, Ethan shoved. The raft lurched forward, seized instantly by the tide. Foam surged around it, lifting the barrels as though the sea had been waiting. The girls squealed in delight, clapping their hands. "We're sailing!" Lily cried. "We're pirates now!" Hope shouted. Grace waved at him, her eyes luminous. "Bye, Daddy. Come soon." Ethan staggered, his hands still reaching as though to pull them back. But Veronica's arm held him. Her nails dug deeper, anchoring him in betrayal. He nearly lunged into the water, nearly waded after the raft, nearly screamed the truth. But her grip was unyielding. He could only watch. The raft drifted further, bobbing like a toy against the expanse. The girls waved, their laughter piercing through the crashing surf. "Daddy, come with us," Lily shouted again, her voice a knife through his heart. Hope blew kisses. Grace's little hand stretched out toward him, her eyes searching his face as though she sensed something he could not bear to admit. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice lost in the wind. The horizon swallowed them, their small figures blurred against the vast sea, reduced to fragile silhouettes riding the waves. They still thought it was play. They still believed their father had given them a gift. Ethan collapsed to his knees in the surf, his face twisted in silent agony. The salt water stung his eyes, though he did not know if it was from the sea or his own tears. Behind him, Veronica stood tall, her hand no longer gripping his arm. She gazed at the horizon with a calm satisfaction, her other hand caressing the curve of her belly. "It's done," she murmured, her voice almost tender. "Our son will have the life he deserves." Ethan bowed his head, his shoulders trembling. The roar of the ocean drowned everything, but inside, there was only silence. The silence of promises broken. The silence of 3 little voices carried farther and farther away, still laughing, still calling, still trusting. He whispered into the wind, words the waves swallowed before anyone could hear. "Forgive me, my princesses." And the raft drifted on, 3 tiny figures swallowed slowly by the horizon, believing it was all still part of the game. The coastline bent southward into a stretch few ever bothered to visit. The tourists stopped miles back, where the beaches were smooth, and the villas rose like white crowns above the cliffs. Here, the land was harsher. Jagged rocks, seaweed-strewn tide pools, gulls screaming at each other over scraps. And tucked between 2 weathered cliffs stood a shack, leaning slightly as though the wind had tried for years to topple it, but never quite succeeded. It was here that Caleb Turner lived. At 67, he was a man carved by salt and storms. His hair had gone silver long before his face had, though the deep lines around his eyes told of years spent squinting into the horizon, reading the moods of the sea. His hands, broad and scarred, still carried the strength of decades hauling nets, though now their labor was gentler, mending what was torn, repairing what was frayed. That morning, as he did most mornings, Caleb sat on an overturned crate just outside his shack. a coil of net spread across his knees. His fingers moved with practiced patience, threading line through torn gaps, tying knots with the ease of long habit. The sound of the surf was his companion, but he added to it in his own way, humming an old sea shanty, half under his breath. The tune was one his father had taught him on the deck of a trawler half a century ago. Its words had faded from his memory, but the melody remained, a tether to the past. By his side lay Rex, the German shepherd stretched out on the sand, his coat a thick blend of sable and black that caught the morning light. His ears twitched at every cry of gulls, every shift of the wind. Even in rest, he carried the poise of a soldier. His dark eyes scanned the shoreline in steady sweeps, his chest rising and falling with calm readiness. Once, Rex had worn a badge. He had run through city alleys, tracked fugitives across fields, and stood at the side of officers who trusted him with their lives. Stories of his service lingered in town. How he had saved a child from a burning car, how he had cornered an armed man without hesitation, how he had taken a knife to his shoulder, yet kept fighting until the job was done. Now, the scar was hidden beneath his fur, and the only battles he fought were against boredom and the occasional raccoon that ventured too close. But Caleb knew. He had seen the fire in Rex's eyes the day they met at the shelter, the restless energy of a warrior without a war. They were alike in their way, both men out of place, both bound to the rhythm of tides and memories. "Good boy," Caleb murmured, glancing down at him as he tied another knot. Rex's tail thumped once against the sand. The shack behind them smelled faintly of cedar and brine. Its shelves were lined with jars of dried herbs, seashells Caleb had pocketed over the years, and a few fading photographs. A woman with kind eyes who had died too young, a young Caleb with a fishing crew long scattered, and one of Rex taken the week Caleb brought him home, tongue out, ears high, eyes already softer than they had been in the kennel. It was a quiet life, lonely perhaps, but steady. Caleb no longer dreamed of fortune or adventure. His world was the sea, his rituals unchanging. At dawn he checked the traps. Midday he repaired nets or cut wood. Evening he lit a lantern, poured a measure of whiskey, and listened to the ocean argue with itself. Rex was always there, constant, faithful, a shadow with 4 legs. That morning the wind carried a sharper edge. The waves broke harder against the rocks, scattering spray high into the air. Caleb squinted at the horizon, sensing a shift. Years at sea had taught him to read storms before they came. But this was not weather. This was something else. A tension that prickled at the back of his neck. Rex felt it too. His ears pricked forward, his body lifting to a sit. He stared north along the beach, nose twitching, muscles taut beneath his coat. A low rumble escaped his throat. Caleb frowned. "What is it, boy?" The dog didn't move, didn't blink. His gaze fixed on the horizon, as though he'd caught a sound the human ear could not, or smelled something carried faintly on the wind. Caleb laid down the net, his humming stilled. He followed Rex's line of sight, but saw nothing beyond the glittering expanse of sea. Still, he trusted the dog. He always had. "Easy," Caleb murmured, but his own pulse quickened. He rested his hands on his knees, leaning forward. The gulls had gone strangely silent, circling above the surf, without their usual squabbling. The waves rolled heavier, louder, as though pushing something toward the shore. Rex rose fully now, stance alert, hackles just beginning to rise. He gave a short, sharp bark, the kind he rarely wasted unless something mattered. Caleb straightened slowly, the hair on his arms lifting despite the warmth of the sun. He didn't know it yet, but this was the morning his life would change. The sea was carrying secrets his way, and Rex, faithful as ever, had already sensed them coming. The late morning sun had begun its slow crawl overhead, bleaching the sand into a pale glare. Caleb had returned to his net, the rhythm of knot and pull easing his mind the way prayer might ease another man's. The old sea shanty hummed low in his throat, a tune meant to keep silence at bay. Rex, however, would not rest. The German shepherd had risen from his usual spot by Caleb's boots, pacing the strip of beach with ears pricked and tail stiff. Every few steps he stopped, nose lifted, chest rising with sharp inhalations. His eyes never left the horizon, scanning the line where sky melted into water. "Settle down, boy," Caleb muttered without looking up, his hands busy with the coarse twine. "It's just gulls arguing over fish guts." But Rex did not settle. His paws scuffed the sand in restless strides, his breath coming faster. Then he froze, body stiff as carved wood. His ears swiveled, catching something Caleb had not yet noticed. A low rumble escaped his throat, the kind of warning growl that had stopped more than one drunk fisherman from wandering too close to Caleb's shack in the past. Caleb sighed, setting the net aside. "What's gotten into you?" He followed Rex's gaze. Out beyond the break of waves, the sea glittered in the sun, deceptively calm. Gulls wheeled above, but their cries were fewer now, sharper, as if startled. Caleb squinted, but saw nothing. No sail, no boat, nothing but the heave of water. Then Rex barked, loud, urgent, the sound reverberating against the cliffs. He bounded toward the surf, paws throwing up sand. Caleb rose sharply to his feet, heart lurching at the suddenness of it. "Rex!" His voice cracked against the wind, but the dog ignored him. The barking continued, sharp and insistent, aimed directly at the sea. Caleb frowned, shading his eyes. Still nothing. He rubbed at his ears, wondering if age was playing tricks on him. But then, faint, fragile, something slipped through the wind. At first he thought it was the gulls. A high-pitched sound stretched thin, but gulls didn't weep. Gulls didn't call daddy, in voices barely strong enough to reach the shore. Caleb froze. His breath snagged in his chest. The cries were faint, carried unevenly on the shifting air, but once heard, they could not be mistaken. Children, out there. Rex barked again, sprinting to the water's edge, paws splashing through the foam. He turned back once, teeth bared in frustration, as if commanding Caleb to hurry. For a heartbeat, the old man stood rooted. His mind scrambled. Children. Here. It was impossible. No family came this far down the coast. The villa was miles north, and even those wealthy fools rarely let their little ones near the tide. And yet, the cries came again. Thin, desperate, fragile against the crash of the waves. Caleb's stomach turned to stone. "Dear God," he whispered. The shepherd lunged into the surf. Water surged around his chest, but he powered forward, strong strokes carrying him into deeper swells. Caleb cursed under his breath, heart pounding as adrenaline slammed through his veins. "Rex! Hold on, boy!" He scrambled for the small dinghy he kept tethered at the rocks. His hands, though gnarled with age, moved fast, untying rope, shoving the boat into the water. He hadn't launched in weeks, but muscle memory returned with brutal clarity. The cries were faint still, but real. There were children out there, lost, maybe drowning. Rex paddled furiously ahead, his black and sable coat slick with spray. He barked between strokes, the sound raw and determined. Caleb heaved himself into the dinghy, shoved the oars deep, and began to row. Each pull sent fire through his shoulders, but he ignored it. His eyes strained against the horizon, scanning for what his ears swore was there. Again the cries came, closer now, carried in the rhythm of waves. Children. 3 voices, high, trembling, but alive. Caleb's throat tightened. The sea was wide, merciless, but Rex had already locked onto the sound. Leading with an instinct, Caleb had long ago learned never to doubt. The shack, the nets, the quiet life. All of it was behind him now. Ahead was the truth the sea had carried, and a battle he hadn't expected to fight at his age. The German shepherd surged forward, a dark shape against the glittering expanse. Caleb rode after him, his heart a storm of fear and disbelief. Whatever waited out there, he knew 2 things. Children were in danger, and Rex, loyal, unyielding Rex, would not stop until they were safe. The sea was no friend to the weak. Its swells rose and fell like the chest of a sleeping giant, each wave threatening to drag the fragile raft deeper into its cold lungs. The 3 children clung to the planks, their laughter spent, their small voices thinning into frightened cries. Salt spray stung their eyes. Little fingers gripped wood until knuckles turned white. And through it all, Rex swam. The German shepherd cut through the waves with relentless strokes, his ears flattened against his head, his muzzle low, his eyes locked on the drifting raft. Water surged around him, soaking his thick coat, but he did not slow. Every surge of the tide only pushed him harder. He barked once through the chaos, a sharp, urgent sound meant to tell them, "Hold on, I'm coming." Lily's tear-streaked face turned toward him. She gasped, pointing with her tiny hand, "A dog! Mommy, a dog!" Her sisters followed her gaze. Their sobs softened into stunned whimpers. For one fleeting second, they believed rescue had found them. Behind, Caleb rowed with all the strength his aging arms could muster. The oars bit deep into the water, the dinghy jerking forward in uneven bursts. His shoulders screamed with pain, but he pressed on, his eyes locked on Rex's black shape cutting the surf. "Good boy," he shouted, though the wind stole half the words. "Stay with them, Rex. I'm coming." The raft pitched dangerously as another wave struck. Grace cried out, clutching her sisters. The barrels groaned, rope straining against the sea's pull. Hope's sobs rose, high and keening, the sound of a child who finally realized this was no game. Rex reached them first. He lunged against the raft, his paws scraping at the edge. His body braced itself in the current, anchoring them with sheer force of will. The girls clung to him instinctively, their tiny hands tangling in his wet fur. The shepherd growled low, not at them, but at the ocean itself, as if daring it to take another inch. Caleb's dinghy slammed through the swell, drawing closer. His arms felt as though they were tearing from their sockets, but he rowed harder. "Hold on," he bellowed. "Don't let go of him." The children obeyed. Lily buried her face against Rex's neck. Grace wrapped both arms around his shoulder, whispering, "Don't leave us." Hope clutched his tail like a rope. Rex pushed against the raft with his chest, kicking furiously to steady it. His bark turned urgent again, sharp blasts that cut through the wind. Caleb heard the command in it, as clear as if spoken. Now. Pull them now. The old fisherman swung the dinghy broadside. He dropped the oars and lunged forward, catching the edge of the raft with both hands. Salt water surged into his eyes, blinding him, but he held fast. "Come on, girls," he grunted. "One at a time." With Rex bracing the raft, Caleb hauled the first child into the dinghy. Hope, trembling and sobbing, collapsed against the boards, coughing up seawater. Caleb turned back instantly, his muscles straining, his lungs burning. Grace came next, clinging to Rex until the last second before Caleb's arms pulled her in. She cried against his chest, her small body shuddering. Lily was last. Her tiny hands refused to let go of Rex's fur. "Don't leave him," she cried. "Don't leave the dog." Caleb met Rex's eyes, sharp, dark, burning with will. The dog didn't release the raft until Caleb had Lily in his arms. Only then did Rex swim alongside the dinghy, paddling furiously as Caleb grabbed the oars again. The return was slower. Every muscle in Caleb's body felt shredded, but adrenaline kept him moving. Rex stayed beside them, his head above water, each breath rough but determined. The children, huddled together in the bottom of the boat, reached out to him with their small hands. He brushed against them when the waves allowed, as if promising, "I'm here. I won't leave you." The shore crept closer, though it felt like miles. Caleb's lungs burned, his vision blurred. But finally, the dinghy scraped against sand. He stumbled out, dragging it further ashore. Rex lunged from the surf, collapsing onto the wet sand for a moment, before rising again, shaking the water from his coat. Caleb lifted the children one by one, their clothes heavy with seawater, their bodies shivering. He carried them beyond the reach of the waves, laying them gently on the sand. They clung to each other, coughing, crying, but alive, alive. Caleb dropped to his knees, chest heaving, staring at them in disbelief. He had not prayed in years, but in that moment, his lips formed words of gratitude to a God he wasn't sure still listened. Rex padded up beside him, dripping and panting, his tail giving one weary wag. Lily crawled forward, wrapping her small arms around his neck. Grace followed, pressing her cheek to his wet fur. Hope, still sobbing, buried her face against his chest. The shepherd stood firm, letting them cling to him, his eyes fixed on the sea, as though daring it to try again. Caleb reached out, his rough hand resting on Rex's back. His voice shook. "Good boy. You saved them." The children's sobs softened into hiccups. The storm in their voices quieted, soothed by the steady rhythm of Rex's breathing. For the first time since the raft had drifted away, they began to believe they were safe. The waves crashed and retreated, as if conceding defeat. The ocean had tried to claim them, but a fisherman's dinghy and a shepherd's courage had pulled them back. Caleb looked at the three shivering girls clinging to his dog, and he knew with absolute certainty, whatever story had brought them here, whatever cruelty had set them adrift, this was only the beginning. The shack smelled of cedar smoke and salt. Its walls creaked in the wind, weathered boards groaning as though they remembered every storm that had ever battered them. Inside, Caleb Turner moved with a haste uncommon to his age, pulling woolen blankets from a cedar chest, shaking the dust from them, and wrapping them carefully around the three dripping children who sat huddled on the wooden floor. The girls were pale and shivering, their lips trembling with every breath. Salt water dripped from their tangled curls, soaking into the old boards beneath them, but they were alive. By some mercy, they were alive. "There now," Caleb murmured, his voice rough but steady, as he tucked the edges of the blankets close around their tiny shoulders. You're safe. No more waves, no more water. Just warm air and fire. He crouched by the hearth, his stiff fingers striking flint against steel, until sparks caught the kindling. A flame bloomed, weak at first, then hungry, devouring the dry wood he fed it. The firelight stretched across the small room, casting the girls' faces in trembling amber. For the first time since he had seen them on that raft, their eyes softened. Rex shook himself once more near the door, spraying droplets across the floor. Then he padded silently toward the children and lay down beside them. His thick coat was still damp, but the heat of his body radiated steady warmth. The girls didn't hesitate. They crawled toward him, their tiny hands burying themselves in his fur, their shivers easing as they pressed their faces against him. Rex didn't move, didn't protest. He simply let them cling, his dark eyes watching the fire, as though he knew this, too, was part of his duty. Caleb stood and crossed to the small stove tucked against the far wall. He filled an iron pot with water from a jug, added dried vegetables, a handful of rice, and a pinch of salt. As the soup began to simmer, the smell of warmth and nourishment filled the shack. He glanced back often, his throat tightening at the sight of 3 little heads resting against Rex's chest. Their small bodies rose and fell in uneven breaths, exhaustion tugging them towards sleep even as fear lingered in their eyes. When the soup was ready, Caleb ladled it carefully into chipped bowls. He carried them over, crouching down so his weathered hands were level with theirs. "Here, little ones," he said softly. "It isn't much, but it'll warm you from the inside." They looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes, still too shocked to speak. Grace, the most serious of the 3, reached first, her fingers trembling as she accepted the bowl. She took a sip, winced at the heat, then drank again, more eagerly. Hope followed, then Lily. Soon the sound of small spoons clinking against ceramic filled the room, quiet but steady. Caleb sat back on his heels, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He watched them eat, their color returning little by little. It was a sight that made his chest ache, not only because of the relief, but because he could not yet fathom what cruelty had left them adrift on the sea. "Easy now," he murmured, almost to himself. "You're safe here. No harm will find you while I still breathe." Rex lifted his head, as if in agreement. His tail thumped softly against the floor when Lily leaned down and kissed his damp ear, whispering something Caleb couldn't hear. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling upward. Outside, the wind howled against the shack, but inside the walls, warmth held its ground. The children's shivers eased, replaced by the drowsiness of full stomachs and borrowed safety. Hope curled against Rex's side, her eyes fluttering closed. Grace leaned her cheek against his back, her tiny hand gripping his fur, as if anchoring herself to the one constant she trusted. Lily rested her head near his paws, her lips curving faintly. A smile. Fragile, fleeting, but real. Caleb's heart twisted. He sat on the crate near the hearth, watching them with a heaviness in his chest that was both grief and gratitude. He thought of his late wife, of the children they had never been able to have. He thought of long years alone in this shack, his only companion a dog rescued from abandonment. And now, 3 small girls asleep on his floor, clinging to that same dog as though he were their savior. Perhaps he was. The old fisherman rubbed his calloused hands over his face. "Lord, help me," he whispered. "What am I meant to do with them now?" No answer came, Only the steady breathing of the children and the low rumble of Rex's contented growl as he kept his vigil. The world beyond the shack was still cruel, still waiting. But for this night, at least, the fire burned, the soup warmed their bellies, and fragile smiles had returned to faces that had nearly been claimed by the sea. Caleb leaned back, his gaze lingering on them. For the first time in years, he did not feel entirely alone. The fire had burned lower, its glow softer now, shadows lengthening along the shack's weathered walls. Outside, the sea still thundered against the rocks, but in here the sound was muffled, as though the old boards and the warmth of the hearth had built a fragile cocoon around the four of them. The triplets sat close together, wrapped in their blankets, their cheeks flushed from soup and fire. They leaned against Rex, whose steady breathing lulled them into something close to calm. His head rested between his paws, eyes half closed, yet his ears twitched at every sound, ever watchful, even in rest. Caleb sat on his crate by the fire, staring at them, his elbows braced on his knees. He felt both relief and unease. Relief because they were safe. Unease because he knew safety was fragile, temporary. He had seen enough storms to know calm was only ever borrowed time. It was Lily who broke the silence. She lifted her head from the blanket, her small voice hesitant, uncertain. "When will Daddy come get us?" The question struck like a spear. Caleb's hands froze where they rested. He looked at her, her wide eyes shining in the firelight, her lips trembling not from cold now, but from the ache of waiting. Grace glanced at her sister, then at Caleb, as if searching for confirmation. Hope shifted against Rex, her little fingers tightening in the dog's fur. For a long moment, Caleb couldn't speak. His throat had turned to stone. He wanted to tell them the truth, that no father worthy of the word would set 3 children adrift at sea, that their daddy was not coming, that he had already chosen to lose them, but the words would not pass his lips. Instead, he drew in a slow breath and rubbed his palms against his knees. "Your daddy." His voice cracked. He swallowed and tried again. "Your daddy isn't here right now." Lily tilted her head, confused. "But he will come, won't he? He always comes." Caleb's heart splintered. He thought of his own childhood, the rare moments when his father had returned from long trips at sea. He remembered standing at the docks, certain the world would right itself when that familiar figure appeared. He remembered what it felt like to believe in someone without question. The girls looked at him with that same trust now, waiting for him to confirm what their hearts insisted must be true. He lowered his gaze to the fire, the flames blurred. "I don't know, sweetheart," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't say when or if he'll come." The silence that followed was heavy. Grace leaned her cheek against her knees, her eyes downcast. Hope pressed herself closer to Rex, whispering something into his fur, as if he might deliver the answer she wanted. Lily bit her lip, her eyes filling though no tears fell. Caleb's chest ached as he looked at them. He could not give them their father, but he could give them something else. He shifted forward, his voice firmer now, though it trembled with feeling. "But listen to me. You are safe here. No one will hurt you while you're under my roof. Not the sea, not the wind, not anyone." The girls looked up at him slowly, their small faces fragile as porcelain. "You'll keep us safe?" Grace asked. Caleb nodded once, solemn. "I will, as long as I have breath in me." Rex lifted his head then, as if sealing the promise. His dark eyes locked on Caleb's, steady, certain. The children seemed to take comfort in it. Hope leaned into him more fully. Lily stroked his damp fur, and Grace's lips curved into the faintest smile. Caleb's heart broke anew at the sight. Their faith was unshaken, even in the face of betrayal. They still believed adults existed, to protect, to guard, to love, without condition. He prayed they never learned otherwise. The fire cracked, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the sea raged, indifferent to the promises spoken in a fisherman's shack. But within those four walls, 3 little girls clung to a dog and the frail assurance of an old man, and for the moment, that was enough. Caleb leaned back, exhaling slowly. His voice, low and rough, carried across the flickering firelight. "You're safe now," he repeated. "No one will hurt you here." And though he knew the storm of truth was still ahead, the words felt right. For tonight, at least, he could keep them. The storm pressed hard against the shack that night. Rain rattled the windows, wind whistled through the cracks, and the sea roared in the distance, a beast pounding at the shore. Inside, the fire glowed steady but low, embers crackling in the hearth, shadows climbing across the walls like restless ghosts. Walter sat near the children, his body weary but unyielding. Lily slept closest to him, her tiny face half hidden beneath a woolen blanket, her lips parted in uneven breaths. Every so often, she whimpered in her sleep, murmuring words too faint to understand. Her sisters were tucked against Rex, their small hands still buried in his thick coat, as though he were their anchor against nightmares. The shepherd had not moved since they drifted into slumber, his chest rising with slow breaths, his eyes half open, always watchful. Walter's chair creaked when he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His gaze never left the children. His heart ached in a way he had not felt for years, not since the days when his badge meant something, when the weight of the town's safety sat squarely on his shoulders. He had been sheriff once, decades ago now, in a town not far inland. He had worn the uniform with pride, walked the dusty main street with a steady gait, and sworn an oath that had burned itself into his bones. Protect the innocent, uphold the law, stand between the weak and those who would do them harm. In the flicker of firelight, memories rose unbidden. A boy lost in the woods, his sobs echoing through the pines until Walter found him and carried him home on his back. A little girl taken in the night by a drifter. Walter had ridden out, heart hammering, and brought her back before sunrise, safe and whole. Parents had shaken his hand with tears in their eyes, and Walter had always said the same thing. "It's my job, nothing more." But deep down, he knew it was more than that. It was who he was. Now, watching Lily stir in uneasy dreams, he felt the same vow flare alive again, though his badge had long since been hung on a nail, gathering dust. These girls had no one else. Whatever father had set them adrift on the ocean had forfeited the right to the word. Walter could not undo that betrayal, but he could stand in its place. A log in the hearth collapsed with a hiss, scattering sparks. Walter rose, slow but sure, and fed more wood to the fire. The flames leapt, warming the chill that had crept into the shack. He turned back, his eyes tracing the fragile outlines of the 3 little ones huddled together. He lowered himself back into the chair, close enough that Lily could reach him if she woke in fear. He would not leave her side. He could not. His mind drifted again, this time to his wife, gone these many years, and the children they had never been blessed with. He remembered her gentle hands, her voice whispering in the quiet of night that he had enough love in him for 10 children, if life had ever given them the chance. He had laughed then. But now, staring at these 3 girls breathing softly in the firelight, he felt the truth of her words. Walter rubbed at his face, rough with stubble, then folded his hands together, leaning forward. He whispered low, words meant only for the silence, and perhaps for God, if he still cared to listen. Give me the strength to keep them safe, just long enough for their mama to find them, just long enough to mend what's been broken. Rex stirred, lifting his head, his ears angling toward the sound of Walter's voice. Their eyes met across the dim light. Man and dog, both too old for heroics, both unwilling to yield to the weight of years. Walter gave a small nod. The shepherd blinked slowly, as if in agreement, then lowered his head back to the children's laps. The storm raged on, but the shack held firm. Walter kept his vigil, unmoving, his eyes tracing the rise and fall of 3 fragile chests beneath heavy blankets. Each breath they took felt like a victory stolen from the sea. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Still he sat, his old bones aching, his eyes heavy, but his will unbroken. For he knew this truth. Justice was not always served in courtrooms or by deputies on horseback. Sometimes it was found here, in a shack by the sea, in the steadfast refusal of an old man to leave 3 betrayed children alone in the dark. And so Walter remained, a sentinel in the night, carrying a badge no one could see, upholding a vow that had never left him. The square of Sand Hollow lay heavy under the noonday sun. Dust drifted in the air, stirred by boots scuffing nervously against the ground. The townsfolk gathered in silence, their eyes darting toward the wooden post where a frail little figure was bound. Lily's thin wrists were tied too tight, her face flushed from the heat, strands of hair sticking to her damp cheeks. The crude sign, "Little Thief," dangled from her chest, swaying in the dry wind. Around her, the crowd shifted uneasily. Mothers clutched their children closer. Old men removed their hats, not in respect, but in grief. But no one dared step forward. Harvey Dalton, the richest and most ruthless man in the county, stood near the platform with his arms crossed, a self-satisfied smirk etched into his thick features. His black vest gleamed with polish, but his eyes were as cold as stone. At the edge of the crowd, Marta, a woman in her 40s with gentle hands and a face hardened by years of work, held a clay jug of water. She had watched the little girl's lips crack in the heat, her head lolling forward from thirst. Marta's heart could not bear it. She stepped out from the line, her voice soft but firm. "Let me give her a drink, Mr. Dalton. She's just a child." The square went deathly still. All eyes snapped to Dalton. His expression darkened, his jaw tightening. He strode forward, boots grinding against the dust, and blocked her path with an outstretched arm. "No," he growled. "A thief learns through suffering. Mercy only makes them weaker." Marta's eyes widened. "She's barely 7. "Enough!" Dalton's voice cracked like a whip, making the crowd flinch. "You'll do as you're told." Marta's hands trembled around the jug, but she didn't move. Her body screamed with fear, but her heart refused to step back. Lily's cracked lips opened, a faint whisper escaping. "Water." Dalton sneered. He raised his hand as though to strike Marta, to drive her back into the crowd. But before he could, a sharp bark split the silence. Every head turned. From the shadow of the blacksmith's porch, Rex emerged. The German shepherd strode forward with steady steps, his coat gleaming, his eyes locked on Dalton. The dog moved with the confidence of one who had once faced greater terrors than this dusty tyrant. Dalton froze mid-motion, his hands suspended in the air. Rex ignored him entirely. His nose nudged Marta's shaking hand, teeth gently gripping the wooden handle of the jug. In one swift motion, he pulled it free from her grasp. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Rex carried the jug carefully, not spilling a drop, and padded across the square. Dust rose beneath his paws. Every eye followed him, some wide with disbelief, others shining with sudden hope. He reached the post, raised his head, and pressed the jug into Lily's bound hands. The girl blinked in shock, her small fingers fumbling to hold it steady. Rex steadied it with his muzzle, tipping just enough for water to touch her lips. Lily drank greedily, the relief visible in every swallow. Tears slid down her cheeks, mingling with the dust. For a heartbeat, the entire square was silent, as if time itself had stopped. Then murmurs began. A woman covered her mouth. A man muttered, "God bless that dog." Another whispered, "He shamed Dalton." Dalton's face turned crimson, fury flooding his features. He stepped forward, fists clenched, but something in Rex's eyes stopped him cold. The shepherd had turned now, placing himself between Lily and Dalton, his stance low, ears pricked, muscles taut. His growl rumbled low and steady, the kind that promised violence if harm came another inch closer. The crowd held its breath. Dalton's lips curled back in a snarl. "It's just a dog," he spat, though his voice lacked its usual iron. He looked around, expecting the townsfolk to echo his anger, but their eyes no longer avoided his. They stared, some defiant, some trembling, but all unwilling to condemn the shepherd's act. Rex's tail flicked once. His growl deepened, steady as thunder. Lily's small hand rested against his back, fingers buried in his fur, as if clinging to life itself. Dalton realized too late what had happened. Control had slipped. In a single moment, with a single act of defiance, a dog had done what no man or woman in Sand Hollow had dared. He had challenged the rule of fear. Walter Grayson, the old sheriff, long retired, stood at the back of the crowd, his weathered face unreadable, but his eyes gleamed faintly as he murmured under his breath, "Good boy." The square had shifted, and Harvey Dalton, for the first time in years, felt the ground unsteady beneath his boots. The silence in the square was heavier than stone. The echo of Rex's growl still vibrated in the air, as if the earth itself had joined the dog's defiance. Lily clutched the clay jug with both hands, water dripping from the corner of her mouth, her eyes wide as she pressed herself against the shepherd's flank. Dalton's face was a storm. Red, contorted, his lips curling like a man who had been struck across the face in front of his own subjects. He raised his hand as if to reassert control, to remind everyone of his power. But something in the crowd shifted. It was small at first, barely noticeable, like a match flickering in the dark. Jacob Miller, the town's blacksmith, stepped forward. His broad frame was dust-streaked, his shirt clinging to muscles built by years at the forge. He carried something in his hand, a rough loaf of bread, baked that morning by his wife. Jacob's boots thudded against the dirt as he crossed the square, his jaw set, his eyes fixed not on Dalton, but on Lily. He stopped just a foot from Rex, crouched low, and held out the loaf. His voice carried low, steady, unshaken. "The child needs more than water." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Dalton's head snapped toward him. "Miller!" he barked, his voice cracking with rage. "Step back! Now!" But Jacob did not move. He broke the bread in half and offered it directly to Lily. The girl hesitated, looking from Dalton's fury to the blacksmith's steady gaze. Rex nudged her gently with his nose, a reassurance. Slowly, with trembling hands, she reached out and took it. The act was simple, bread to a hungry child. But in that moment, it was rebellion. Dalton's fury twisted into something darker, but before he could act, another voice rose. "And she'll need more than bread." Elena Vargas, owner of the saloon, stepped out from the shade of her porch. She was a tall woman with dark hair pinned tight, her dress worn, but her posture proud. People often said she ran her saloon with more authority than most men could muster. Now, her eyes blazed as she crossed the square. In her hands she carried a folded quilt, the edges frayed from years of use. She reached Lily's side, her movements firm but gentle, and draped the quilt over the child's shoulders. "No child should freeze while a whole town watches," she said, her voice ringing clear. The murmurs grew louder. A man whispered, "God bless her." A woman said, "She's right." Dalton's jaw clenched. "Back to your posts," he roared. "All of you. This is no concern of yours." But it was too late. Sparks had caught. The people no longer looked at Dalton with the same bowed heads. They looked at Jacob and Eleanor, at the child covered in a quilt, at the dog standing guard. Something long buried in them, compassion, courage, stirred awake. An old man near the back muttered, "She's just a little girl." Another nodded. "And we've let this go too far." Dalton turned in fury, his voice rising like a whip. "Quiet!" But the command did not land as it once had. His words fell into air already buzzing with murmurs. Jacob rose to his full height, meeting Dalton's glare without flinching. "There's a line, Harvey. You crossed it." Eleanor folded her arms, standing beside Rex as though daring Dalton to touch her. "We've all been afraid too long." The crowd shifted forward, ever so slightly. Not enough to be a mob, not yet, but enough to remind Dalton that power built on fear could tremble when ordinary people remembered their humanity. Rex lowered his head, ears flat, his growl rumbling low like distant thunder. Lily leaned against him, nibbling the bread with slow, grateful bites. For the first time since she had been tied to that post, her lips curled into the faintest ghost of a smile. Walter Grayson, watching from the back, felt something stir in his chest. The town he had once sworn to protect had not been entirely lost. All it had needed was a spark, a dog carrying water, a blacksmith with bread, a saloon owner with a quilt. And now, under the noonday sun, those sparks glowed against Dalton's shadow. The tyrant spat in the dust, his voice a low snarl. "You think this changes anything? You think defiance will save you?" But even as he spoke, he saw it. The eyes of his people no longer bowed, no longer entirely his. The cracks had formed, and all it had taken was the courage to feed a hungry child. Dust swirled in the square, as if the very ground recoiled from the moment. The loaf of bread had been broken, the quilt draped, and the child had drunk water from Rex's careful offering. The town had witnessed it all. What had once been silence born of fear was now filled with murmurs, the kind that spread like fire through dry grass. Dalton's face flushed a dangerous red. His chest heaved, each breath coming harder, sharper, like a bull about to charge. He stepped forward, boots striking the dirt with heavy, deliberate thuds. His hand shot up, pointing at the crowd. "Enough!" His voice cracked across the square like a whip. The murmurs fell, but they did not vanish. Faces turned toward him, wary but no longer wholly submissive. Dalton's eyes darted from Jacob to Elena, then to the others, the blacksmith still standing tall, the saloon keeper with her arms crossed, the old sheriff's quiet figure at the back, and the muttering townsfolk whose courage had begun to flicker. Rage twisted his mouth into a sneer. "My word is law in Sand Hollow," he thundered, "and don't you forget it." A silence followed, but it was thinner now, stretched too tight. Dalton jabbed a finger at Jacob, his voice dripping venom. "You think you're brave, Miller? I can shut down your forge before nightfall. Who will feed your family then?" He spun on Elena, his glare like a blade. "And you, Vargas, you'll find your saloon empty. No one will risk crossing me to drink at your tables. You'll be ruined before the week is out." The crowd shifted uneasily. Mothers pulled children closer. Men looked at their boots, but their eyes kept flicking up, watching, measuring. Fear still clung to them, but it no longer rooted them as deeply. Dalton turned his fury wider, sweeping his arm across the townsfolk. "All of you, don't think I don't see. You whisper, you mutter, you let yourselves be swayed by a dog and a few fools with bread and rags. Let me remind you what happens to those who forget their place. I own your fields. I own your wages. Defy me, and I will tear it all from under you. Your children will starve, your homes will rot, and you will crawl back to me begging." His words were fire meant to scorch, but something in the crowd shifted again. A murmur rose, faint but insistent. "He can't starve us all," someone muttered. Another voice, trembling but clear, said, "We've given him everything, and still it's never enough." Dalton's head snapped toward the voices, but the faces blended together. The whispers grew harder to pin down. He could not silence them all. Rex growled low, stepping forward until his body blocked Lily entirely. His teeth bared in a steady line of warning. The crowd drew in a collective breath. Dalton's eyes flared. He gestured wildly at the shepherd. "This is what you bow to. A mutt? An animal dares defy me in my own town?" He spat in the dust. "I'll see it shot before sunset." The threat struck like a stone thrown into water. Ripples spread instantly. Gasps, protests, a woman's voice crying, "No!" Jacob's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "You'll lay a hand on that dog over my dead body." Elena joined him, her voice steady. "And mine." The murmurs swelled. People shifted forward, closer, their fear colliding with something stronger. Anger, indignation, compassion. Dalton raised his voice louder, desperation sharpening its edges. "Do you hear yourselves? Have you all gone mad? I built this town from dust. I put food on your tables, roofs over your heads. Without me, you are nothing." But the words no longer rang as they once had. They echoed hollow, bouncing off faces that no longer bowed. At the edge of the square, Walter Grayson's voice cut through, quiet but firm. "Without them, you are nothing, Harvey, and you always have been." The words struck like a hammer blow. Dalton spun, his eyes wild, searching for the old sheriff in the crowd. But the damage was done. The murmurs had become voices. Voices had become a swell, and the swell was rolling towards something he could not stop. For the first time in years, Dalton's shadow did not stretch far enough to cover Sand Hollow. His rage burned hotter, but beneath it, fear crept in. He had threatened, he had promised ruin, but the unease spreading in the crowd told him the truth. Fear was no longer enough. The cracks in his empire had begun, and they had begun with a child, a dog, and the quiet bravery of ordinary people. Dalton's voice faltered as he roared his last warning. "Remember, my word is law." But the words, once iron, fell into the dust like brittle glass. The storm had passed, but Sand Hollow lay in a silence that felt brittle, like glass ready to shatter. Dust had settled over the square, yet the air still carried the tension of what had happened there. People whispered in uneasy clusters, speaking of the dog that had defied Dalton, of the blacksmith's bread, of the quilt draped by Elena. Fear remained, but for the first time in years, it had been pierced. Down by the shore, in a shack weathered by salt and time, the three sisters huddled together near a low fire. The flames painted their faces in soft orange flickers. Rex lay stretched across the floor, his great head between his paws, eyes half closed, but never truly at rest. Every creak of wood drew a twitch of his ears. He was their sentinel, their anchor. Walter sat in his chair, pipe forgotten in his hand, watching the children. Grace leaned against her sisters, already drifting into sleep. Hope lay with her cheek pressed to Rex's chest, lulled by the dog's steady breathing. But Lily, the eldest by only minutes, stayed awake, her wide eyes reflecting the fire. At last her voice, no louder than a whisper, reached him. "Mister?" Walter leaned forward, his rough hands on his knees. "Yes, child." She hesitated, lips trembling. Her gaze flicked to her sleeping sisters, then back again. Finally she whispered, "My mama's name was Maria Santos." Walter's breath caught. He remembered that name. Months ago, there had been whispers of a young woman who worked for Dalton and then vanished. The sheriff had asked questions once, but they had drowned in Dalton's power. The town stopped speaking her name. "I remember," Walter said softly. "She worked in the big house," Lily continued, her small voice fragile but steady. "She told me she didn't mind, 'cause she had us to come home to. But at night, when she thought we were asleep, she said things. She said, 'Mister.'" Dalton had secrets. Walter leaned closer, jaw tight. "What kind of secrets, Lily?" Her fingers twisted in her blanket. "She said he hurt people, that he paid men to do things in the dark, that he took from the town and gave nothing back, and if anyone found out—" Lily's breath hitched. "He'd make them disappear." The fire cracked, sparks leaping up the chimney. Rex lifted his head, ears pricked. "One night, Mama didn't come home," Lily whispered. "Daddy told us not to ask questions. He said she left, but I know she didn't. Mr. Dalton made her disappear." The silence deepened, broken only by the sea whispering against the shore. Walter felt the words strike harder than any courtroom testimony he'd ever heard. A child, trembling but unflinching, speaking the truth the whole town had been too afraid to name. He laid his hand gently over hers. "Thank you for telling me. That took more courage than most grown men will ever have." Her lips quivered. "Will you keep us safe?" "Yeah, even if he knows we told." Rex pressed his head under her hand, as if answering for him. Lily stroked his ear. "Mama said dogs were too loyal to be bought. That's why I trust him. He's not like Daddy." Walter's chest ached. He looked at the three girls curled in his shack, and something stirred in him. Not just sorrow, but resolve. He had failed Maria once by staying silent. He would not fail her daughters. "You're safe here," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a vow. Only when Lily closed her eyes at last, her cheek pressed to Rex's fur, did Walter rise. He stared into the flames, the girl's whisper echoing in his mind. Dalton has secrets, and Mama vanished because she knew. Walter did not sleep that night. Memories pressed in. Maria's tired eyes as she left Dalton's store. The rumors that had drifted through town before silence swallowed them. Back then, he had told himself it was no longer his fight. Now he knew better. He pulled on his coat, revolver at his side. "Come on, boy," he murmured. Rex rose instantly, padding at his heel. They followed the overgrown trail inland. Walter remembered something Elena, the saloon owner, had once said after too much whiskey. Dalton keeps what he doesn't want seen in the old church barn. Walter had dismissed it as gossip, but with Lily's words, the pieces aligned. The barn loomed from the shadows, its roof sagging, windows boarded. Once holy ground, now nothing but rot and secrecy. Walter pushed the heavy door open. The smell of mildew and paper struck him. Rex trotted ahead, nose sweeping. Near the pulpit, he pawed at a loose board, whining low. Walter pried it up. Beneath lay a cavity lined with oilskin, and inside, a bundle of ledgers bound in cracked leather. Walter pulled one free. His hands shook as he flipped through, pages of Dalton's handwriting, columns of names, numbers, transactions, payments to drifters, bribes to deputies, even state men, dates that matched fires, foreclosures, disappearances. Then, near the back, in the margins, Santos knows too much. Walter's chest constricted. Proof. Maria had been silenced because she knew. "This is it, boy," he whispered. "The rope that'll hang him." He shoved the ledger inside his coat, replaced the board and left. The barn stood quiet, but he knew it was a nest of rot. He and Rex walked back to the shore, the old man's hand resting on the shepherd's head. "Maria tried to tell us. Now it's up to us to finish what she started." When Walter returned, he laid the ledgers on the table. Lily's eyes blinked open. "Did you find something?" He opened a book, reading aloud in a low voice. "Shipments labeled grain and timber, but the weights don't match. Payments off the record. Bribes to judges, deputies." His jaw tightened. Dalton's been smuggling, laundering, paying men to look the other way. Rex growled low, pacing. Walter turned another page. The note stared back at him. "Santos knows too much." Lily's face went pale. "That's Mama." Walter bowed his head. He had once chosen silence. Maria had paid the price. Now her daughters lived under the same shadow. He closed the book. His palm pressed hard to its cover. "Your mother was braver than most. She tried to stop him, and he silenced her." The fire cracked. Walter knelt before the children. "Listen to me. You're not just 3 hungry little girls. You're Maria Santos's daughters. The daughters of the one woman who dared to bring Harvey Dalton down. That's why he fears you. That's why he cast you aside." Grace's eyes filled. "But we didn't do anything." "No," Walter said, "but sometimes evil doesn't fear what you've done. It fears what you might become." He laid his weathered hand on Lily's shoulder. "Your mama left behind the truth, and now it's in our hands." Rex shifted between the girls and the door, curling himself like a shield. Walter saw the bond. The shepherd had already chosen them as his own. Loyalty was bone deep in dogs like him, carved by years of service. Now he gave it freely to these children. Walter sat heavily,
staring at the ledgers. He had worn a badge once, sworn an oath to protect the innocent. He had failed Maria, but perhaps he could honor her by defending the daughters she left behind. Outside, the sea pounded against the rocks like a drumbeat of war. Walter knew Dalton would come hunting. The man would not let this proof slip from his grasp. But the tide had already begun to turn. Fear had cracked in the square. A child had spoken the truth. And now Walter had the rope to pull Dalton's empire down. He drew a steady breath, eyes hard in the firelight. "Rest now," he told the girls. "Tomorrow, we fight back." The sisters curled against Rex, finally safe enough to dream.
Walter sat awake, the ledgers heavy in his lap, the old oath burning anew in his chest. Protect the innocent, stand against the wicked, no matter the cost. The storm had passed, but Sand Hollow lay in a silence that felt brittle, like glass ready to shatter. Dust had settled over the square, yet the air still carried the tension of what had happened there. People whispered in uneasy clusters about the child tied to Dalton's post, the blacksmith's bread, the quilt draped by Eleanor, and the dog who had defied him. Fear lingered, but for the first time in years it had been pierced. Down by the shore, in his weathered shack, Walter kept watch over the three sisters. The fire burned low, painting their faces in soft flickers. Rex lay across the floor, eyes half closed, but every creak of wood twitched his ears. He was their sentinel, their anchor. Grace slept against her sisters. Hope dozed with her cheek pressed to Rex's chest, lulled by his breathing. But Lily, the eldest by minutes, stayed awake, her eyes reflecting the fire. At last, her voice came, soft as a sigh. "Mister?" Walter leaned forward. "Yes, child?" Her lips trembled. "My mama's name was Maria Santos." The name struck him like a blow. He remembered the whispers months ago. A woman from Dalton's estate who vanished. The sheriff had asked questions once, but Dalton's influence smothered them. The town learned to be silent. "She worked in the big house," Lily continued. "She didn't mind, 'cause she had us to come home to. But at night, she said things. She said Mr. Dalton had secrets." Walter's jaw tightened. "What kind of secrets?" "She said he hurt people, paid men to do things in the dark, took from the town and gave nothing back. And if anyone found out, he'd make them disappear." The fire cracked. Rex lifted his head, ears pricked. "One night Mama didn't come home. Daddy said she left, but I know she didn't." Lily's voice hardened with certainty. "Mr. Dalton made her disappear." Walter felt the words heavier than any oath he'd sworn. He laid his hand over hers. "Thank you for telling me. That took more courage than most grown men will ever have." Her eyes filled. "Will you keep us safe, even if he knows we told?" Rex pressed his head beneath her hand as if answering. Lily stroked his ear, whispering, "Mama said dogs were too loyal to be bought. That's why I trust him. He's not like Daddy." Walter's chest burned with sorrow and resolve. He had failed Maria once. He would not fail her daughters. "You're safe here," he vowed. But that night, Walter did not sleep. Memories gnawed at him. Maria's tired eyes leaving Dalton's store, the rumors that had faded into silence. He had told himself it wasn't his fight. Now he knew it always had been. He pulled on his coat, revolver at his side. "Come on, boy," he whispered. Rex rose instantly, padding at his heel. They followed the overgrown trail inland. Eleanor's drunken whisper returned to him. Dalton keeps what he doesn't want seen in the old church barn. Walter had dismissed it then. Tonight, he could not. The barn loomed in moonlight, its roof sagging, its windows boarded. Rex pawed at the pulpit floor until Walter pried a board loose.
Beneath lay a bundle of ledgers wrapped in oilskin. Walter flipped one open. Columns of Dalton's handwriting, bribes, shipments disguised as grain and timber, payments to hired thugs, and in the margin of one page, Santos knows too much. Walter's chest constricted. Proof. Maria had been silenced for knowing. "This is it, boy," he whispered, "the rope that'll hang him." He hid the ledgers beneath his coat and returned to the shack. Lily stirred as he laid them on the table. "Did you find something?" He opened a book, reading aloud. Bribes to deputies, false shipments, payments to drifters. His jaw clenched. Dalton's been smuggling, laundering, buying silence. Rex growled low, and Walter turned another page. Santos knows too much. Lily froze. "That's Mama." Walter bowed his head. Maria hadn't vanished. She had been erased for daring to name the truth. He pressed his palm hard to the ledger's cover. "Your mother was braver than most. She risked everything to stop him. And now he wants to erase you too." He knelt before the girls. "You're not just 3 hungry children. You're Maria Santos's daughters. That's why Dalton fears you. Not for what you've done, but for what you carry." The fire cracked. Rex curled between the girls and the door, his body a shield. Walter saw it clearly now. Loyalty had already chosen its side. Outside, the sea pounded the rocks. Dalton would come hunting, and he would bring wolves. But fear had already cracked in Sand Hollow, and Walter carried the proof in his hands. "Rest now," he told them. "Tomorrow, we fight back." In Dalton's study, lamplight flickered against dark wood. The county paper lay on his desk, headline bold, "Strange Defiance in Sand Hollow." It spoke of a child shamed in the square, defended by townsfolk, and worse, of a German shepherd who delivered water to the little girl. Dalton's lip curled. Even in print, he felt mocked. He crumpled the paper and hurled it into the fire. "You see what's happening?" he snarled at the 2 men in the corner. His hired muscles shifted uneasily. "People are talking," one ventured. "The girl," Dalton's eyes blazed. "The girl is Maria Santos's brat. Maria thought she could expose me. Where is she now? Gone." His smile twisted. "And her daughter carries her eyes, her questions. That child is a dangerous witness." Even his men flinched. Dalton jabbed a finger. "Find her. Silence her. I don't care if the dog guards her. If she whispers my name, everything I've built will crack." He drained a glass of whiskey, his hand shaking. Fear seeped in. Not of poverty, but of exposure. Maria's daughter carried her mother's unfinished fight, and Dalton would burn Sand Hollow before letting one child undo him. The next morning he summoned the town. Farmers, mothers, children gathered in the square, uneasy and silent. Hooves clattered. 3 riders appeared. Strangers, mercenaries. The first was tall and gaunt, with a rifle across his back. The second, broad as an ox, shotgun in hand. The third, younger, cruel, a rope coiled at his saddle. They dismounted, spurs clinking, their grins sharp as blades. Dalton emerged, flanked by nervous deputies. He spread his arms as though welcoming his people. "Yesterday, some of you forgot yourselves. You forgot who built this town, who feeds you, who keeps order. So I've brought men to remind you." The mercenaries loomed. The broad one cracked his knuckles. The young one toyed with his rope. The gaunt one scanned the crowd like a butcher choosing cuts. Dalton's voice rose. "You dare defy me? Feed thieves. Question my word. My patience has limits. Mercy has limits. My word is law." The crowd shrank back.
fear curling through them again. Yet beneath it stirred unease, the bitter shame of silence. At the back of the square, Walter stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately, each step measured. Rex moved with him, hackles raised, a growl rumbling. Dalton sneered. "Well, well, old Sheriff Grayson, thought you buried your badge." Walter stopped at the center, hand slipping into his coat. Sunlight caught the gleam of brass. Gasps rippled. He raised the old sheriff's badge high. "The law," Walter said, his voice rough but unyielding, "is not dead while I still breathe." A hush fell. Dust swirled. Rex barked once, sharp as thunder. Dalton's face flushed. "You dare! These men are the law now. My law. And you can't protect anyone." Walter's eyes narrowed. "The law was never yours to own, Harvey. You twisted it. You sold it. But you don't own it." "And these people know it." Murmurs spread. Grayson's badge. The law. The name Maria Santos lingered on their lips when Walter spoke it aloud. "That child is Maria's daughter, and Maria was braver than you ever were. She carried the truth. Now her child carries it." The crowd gasped. Dalton hissed, "Careful, old man. That's treason." Walter held the badge steady. "No, that's the law." The mercenaries shifted, uneasy. The townsfolk's whispers rose like wind through dry grass. Fear still gripped them, but it was thinning, and in its place stirred something older, hope. Rex growled low, his body coiled, his eyes locked on Dalton. Walter's hand rested briefly on the dog's head, steadying him. "Not yet, boy, but the day's coming." The square trembled like a tinderbox, ready to ignite. Dalton still roared, his mercenaries still loomed, but the cracks in his empire widened, and in that morning light, San Hollow remembered that the law was not Dalton's to command. The square of San Hollow had never felt so taut, stretched between silence and storm. Dalton stood at the center, his mercenaries looming behind, his words still echoing. "My word is law." Yet the echo clanged hollow. Walter's badge glinted in the morning sun. Rex barked once, sharp and unyielding. The people stirred. Fear lingered, but no longer ruled. The first step came from Marta. Trembling, she walked forward, pulled a bundle of bread from her satchel, and laid it before Lily. "She will eat," Marta said, her voice carrying farther than she thought. "No man has the right to starve a child." Gasps rippled. Dalton's head snapped toward her, rage twisting his face. But before he spoke, Jacob Miller, the blacksmith, strode forward with another loaf. "She'll eat mine too. And if Dalton means to punish me, let him. I'll not bow to cruelty any longer." Murmurs thickened, heads lifted. Elena Vargas stepped next, laying a quilt over Lily's shoulders. "No child of San Hollow will be left to freeze. Not while I still breathe." Dr. Miller pressed a canteen into Lily's hands. "Every life matters. If Harvey Dalton calls this weakness, then I choose weakness gladly." One by one more came. Apples, milk, shawls. Small gifts, yet together they formed something greater. Defiance. Dalton roared. "Stop this! You fools are throwing away your lives!" But the crowd no longer flinched. Marta's voice rose. "Fear does not feed our children, and fear will not silence us anymore." Jacob crossed his arms. "Take my forge if you will, but not this bread." Eleanor stood tall. "Empty my saloon, but not this quilt." Dr. Miller lifted his chin. "Call us weak. Then all of San Hollow stands weak together." The murmurs burst into cries. "She's just a child. No more. We won't bow." Rex barked again, his growl joining their voices. Walter breathed deeply. For the first time in years, he felt it. The pulse of Sand Hollow, alive again. Dalton staggered back, sweat on his brow. His mercenaries shifted, uneasy. The power of 3 guns meant little against the rising tide of a whole town. It had begun with bread, water, and blankets. Small mercies, grown into rebellion. Dalton's voice cracked. "You'll pay for this, all of you." But he saw it in their faces. The fear was gone. He barked an order. "Move that dog!" Rex planted himself before Lily and her sisters, muscles tight, teeth bared. The broad mercenary stepped forward with his shotgun. "It's just a mutt." He swung the weapon to shove Rex aside. The shepherd exploded, snapping jaws inches from the man's hand. The mercenary stumbled back, cursing. The rope man sneered, stepping forward. Rex lunged again, his bark cracking like thunder. The rope slipped uselessly to the dirt. Gasps spread, then whispers. "He won't back down, not even against guns." Dalton shouted over them, but his words rang hollow. Everyone had seen it. Rex had stood firm where no man dared. Walter stepped forward, voice clear. "That's not just a dog. That's courage. Courage you can't buy, Harvey. Courage you can't beat." Even the mercenaries hesitated. The broad one flexed his fingers, shaken. The young one retrieved his rope with trembling hands. The gaunt one muttered, "He'll tear a man's throat before he moves." Dalton's composure cracked. "Are you afraid of a beast?" But the townsfolk no longer were. Their whispers swelled. "He's braver than any of us. He guards the children better than their fathers. If a dog stands, why don't we?" And then the wave rose. Mothers stepping forward, men squaring shoulders, old voices lifting. Rex barked once more, commanding, and the crowd roared with him, united. Dalton staggered back, power slipping through his fists. For years he had ruled through silence, through bowed heads. But silence was broken. At the center stood Rex, teeth bared, chest heaving, eyes daring Dalton to cross the line. "You'll regret this," Dalton spat. But the truth had settled. The dog would not move, and neither would the people. For years, Sand Hollow had lived in silence. Built from fear, Dalton had thrived on it. But this morning, silence cracked. "Take the mutt down," Dalton shrieked. The mercenaries didn't move. The broad one remembered the near bite. The young one fingered his rope but stayed put. The gaunt one clenched his jaw, calculating. A woman's voice rang. "Even his men won't move." Another. "The dog has more courage than Dalton's guns." Dalton spun, shouting, "I own you all, your wages, your land, your breath." But the words rang brittle. Marta lifted her chin. "You don't own me." Jacob, "You don't own my forge." Eleanor, "You don't own my saloon." Dr. Miller, "And you will never own the truth." The murmurs swelled into something larger. A farmer raised a loaf. A mother drew her child close, not in fear, but protection. Young men stepped forward, remembering strength. Dalton's fury turned wild. "I'll ruin you all," he shrieked. But his words drowned beneath another sound. The crowd rising. Not chaos, but collective defiance. Rex barked once, sharp and commanding. It felt less like a dog's bark, more like a call to rise. Walter stepped into the open, his badge glinting. Dalton's law is broken. The law of Sand Hollow is the people's, and it lives again. Gasps rippled. Heads lifted, eyes burned. The spell of fear cracked further. Dalton turned to his mercenaries, but even they faltered. Their weapons hung, their feet unmoving. They too had seen the shift. "Do something," Dalton hissed, but his voice had lost its weight. The tide had turned. The people had seen mercy. Bread in small hands, a quilt on thin shoulders, water touching dry lips. They had seen bravery, one dog standing where no man dared. And now they knew mercy was stronger than cruelty, courage contagious. Dalton roared, but his sound fell empty. Someone shouted, "No more!" Another, "We stand together!" Until the square trembled with a chorus, ragged but fierce. The mercenaries faltered, weapons slipping as the crowd pressed forward. Dalton's face twisted in disbelief, his hands trembling. Fear had slipped from his grasp. Walter raised his voice, steady as iron. "The law is not a man, Harvey. The law is the people. And today, the people remember who they are." The crowd roared in agreement, and Harvey Dalton, who had ruled Sand Hollow with an iron grip, saw what he feared most, a town no longer afraid of him. The square still hummed with defiance when another sound rose from the horizon, faint, steady, unmistakable. Hooves. A plume of dust curled upward along the north road, the rhythm of iron shoes striking dry earth growing louder. Dalton's sneer faltered. His mercenaries shifted uneasily, eyes locked on the hills. Walter Grayson's heart steadied. He had prayed for this, trusted in it, and now it had come. Through the shimmer of heat, riders emerged. At their head rode Sheriff Morales, tall in the saddle, his wide-brimmed hat low, the sun flashing against the star pinned to his chest. Behind him came 6 deputies, rifles slung, faces set with grim resolve. The crowd parted, murmurs swelling. "The sheriff, Morales is here." Hope sparked, fragile but alive. Morales slowed as he entered the square, dust rising golden around him. His gaze swept the scene, Lily bound and wrapped in blankets, Rex planted like a sentinel, Walter holding his badge high, Dalton with 3 mercenaries at his back. The sheriff dismounted, boots striking hard against the earth. He stripped his gloves, every movement deliberate. His voice rang measured but sharp as steel. "Walter Grayson, I got your message. You said there was truth in Sand Hollow that needed the law." Walter lifted the cracked ledger, its pages heavy with Dalton's handwriting. "And I meant it. Dalton's rule is built on lies and blood. Maria Santos discovered it. She vanished for it. But her daughter lives, and she carries her mother's truth. We have the proof now." Gasps rippled as he held up the ledger. Even the deputy's eyes sharpened. Dalton flushed crimson. "Lies! Slander! You think you can ride into my town and tell me how to run it?" Sheriff Morales's gaze cut to him, dark and unblinking. "This isn't your town, Harvey. It belongs to its people, and the law doesn't bow to your coin." Mercenaries shifted, fingers tightening on weapons. Deputies loosened rifles in answer. The square bristled, one spark from chaos. Rex barked, sharp and commanding. His body braced low, teeth bared, growl rumbling through the dust. The mercenaries froze, remembering his ferocity. Morales's voice carried, steady as iron. "Harvey Dalton, you stand accused of fraud, bribery, smuggling, conspiracy, and of attempting to murder 3 innocent children." Gasps broke. Marta clutched her shawl. Jacob's fists clenched. Elena's eyes blazed. Dalton roared, desperate, pointing at Lily. "That child is nothing but a thief and a liar." But Lily rose, clutching Rex's fur. Her voice shook, but it carried clear. "You pushed us into the sea, Daddy. You said it was a game. But it wasn't." The square froze. Dalton's face drained. Then the crowd erupted. "We heard it from her mouth. The children speak the truth." Sheriff Morales stepped closer, voice final. "Harvey Dalton, you are under arrest." For the first time in decades, Dalton's grip shattered. The square roared its approval, the sound rolling like thunder. Walter lifted the ledger high. "These pages show every crooked deal. Mercenaries paid, judges bribed, shipments disguised. And here," he jabbed a finger at one margin, "here is Maria Santos's name, the woman who vanished after she uncovered too much." The crowd gasped. Marta's hands trembled. Jacob's jaw locked. Eleanor's eyes glistened with memory. Dalton shouted again, but the cracks in his voice betrayed him. Morales knelt before Lily. "Child, your mother's name is here. Did she ever speak of this?" Lily's knuckles whitened in Rex's fur. "Mama said Mr. Dalton had secrets, that he hurt people, paid men to hide it. She said if anyone found out, he'd make them disappear. Then one night she never came home. Daddy said she left, but I know she didn't. Mr. Dalton made her disappear." The words struck the square like arrows. Mothers clutched children. Men shook their heads in grief and anger. Dalton lunged, pointing a trembling finger. "She's lying. You'd take the word of a child over mine?" But no one moved to defend him, not even his mercenaries. Morales's gaze cut to the three. His voice snapped like a whip. "Your names are here too. Paid in silver to break bones, drag men into alleys, silence this town. Stand with him, and you'll hang with him." He read their names aloud. Lucas Crow, Ben Holt, Sam Dyer. The crowd turned on them, eyes sharp as blades. The broad mercenary dropped his shotgun with a thud. "I'm done," he muttered, stepping back. The young one let his rope fall limp. "I ain't hanging for Dalton." Only the gaunt one lingered. Dalton's eyes pleaded, but the man spat into the dust, dropped his rifle, and stepped aside. Murmurs surged. Even his men won't stand with him. It's over. Dalton stood alone, trembling, fists clenched. "You fools! You think this ends me?" Morales's voice cut him down. "By the authority of this county, you are under arrest," Walter added firm. "And by the word of Maria Santos, and the courage of her child, the truth is spoken." Rex barked once, sealing the moment. The square erupted. Decades of silence shattered in a single roar. Hats flew skyward, voices cracked with triumph, tears streaked cheeks. Dalton staggered as deputies seized him, shackles biting his wrists. His curses fell flat, drowned in the people's cheer. The mercenaries slunk to the edges, stripped of their bravado. And at the center stood Lily. She leaned against the post where Dalton had tied her, her small body trembling, her eyes shining, not with fear, but survival. Walter moved forward, knife in hand. With careful motions, he cut the ropes. The bindings snapped loose, falling to the dust. Lily swayed, then crumpled. But Rex was there, pressing against her chest, steady as stone. She buried her face in his fur, sobbing. Rex licked her hands, whining softly, eyes wet in the sunlight. The crowd broke into tears. Mothers wept. Men swallowed hard. Eleanor pressed her lips. Jacob bowed his head. Morales lifted his voice over the swell. By the will of San Hollow, Harvey Dalton's reign ends today. The words struck like sparks to dry grass. The cheer that followed shook the rooftops. Voices shouted not Dalton's name, but Walter's, Morales's, and above all, Rex's. "Rex!" cried a boy. "Bless that dog!" shouted a woman. "Maria's girl is free!" Lily lifted her face from Rex's fur, whispering through tears. Mama was right. He had secrets, but we're still here. Walter's throat tightened. He laid a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, child. You gave this town back its voice." Rex pressed close, still shielding her even though the ropes were gone. Deputies dragged Dalton away, his curses ignored. The people surged forward, not to strike him, but to surround Lily, offering bread, water, blankets, prayers. Not charity, but recognition. Walter scanned the crowd. Farmers, mothers, children, blacksmith, saloon keeper, doctor. For the first time in decades, San Hollow's pulse beat strong again. Liberation. Not just for Lily, but for the whole town. Rex lifted his head, barking once, sharp and resolute. The crowd answered with another roar, as though his bark had become their anthem. And there, in the dust and sunlight of San Hollow's square, fear finally broke. The square of San Hollow still pulsed with the echoes of liberation. Dust had not yet settled, and townsfolk lingered in clusters, their voices buzzing with awe and disbelief. For the first time in years, Dalton's shadow was gone. Yet one final miracle remained. Another sound came from the horizon, not hooves, but wagon wheels and the cadence of official horses. Sheriff Morales's hand brushed his holster, then eased when he saw the banners, federal marshals. Behind them rattled a wagon, and seated inside upright, her dark hair braided back, was Maria Santos, alive. The crowd gasped as one. Whispers broke like a wave. "Maria! She's alive!" Walter froze, his old heart pounding. Lily, clutching Rex's fur, lifted her head, her eyes wide, lips parted. She trembled as the wagon stopped, and the marshals helped Maria down. Maria Santos stood once more on San Hollow soil. Her face bore lines of hardship, but her eyes burned fierce. "Lily," she whispered, then broke into a run. The blanket slipped from Lily's shoulders as she raced forward, arms outstretched. "Mama!" she cried. Maria dropped to her knees, catching her child in an embrace that carried years of longing. Lily buried her face against her mother's neck, sobbing. Rex pressed close, tail wagging, leaning into Maria's arm. She stroked his fur, whispering, "You kept her safe. God bless you." Grace and Hope rushed to cling to her skirts, crying, "Mama!" Maria gathered them all, trembling with joy. The square erupted, louder than when Dalton was taken. "Maria's back. Justice lives." Sheriff Morales raised his voice. "Maria Santos has been under federal protection since escaping Dalton's men. She carried the first testimony that brought us here today." Maria turned, arms still around her daughters. "I tried to stop him. When they silenced me, I thought I'd never see my girls again. But here we are, alive, free." Walter stepped forward, holding the ledger. "You lit the spark. Your girls carried it. Together, you brought him down." Maria's eyes glistened. "No, Walter. You carried it too. You kept them safe when I could not." Rex barked once, sealing the truth. The townspeople surged forward, showering Maria and the children with bread, water, and flowers. For the first time in years, the square was filled not with fear, but with family, bound by loyalty, sacrifice, and courage. As the sun dipped, Maria kissed her daughters' foreheads. Home. We're going home. In the weeks after Dalton's arrest, Sand Hollow moved like a tide turning at last. At first, disbelief lingered, as though his voice might still bark orders from his store porch. But each sunrise proved him gone, locked behind iron bars, his empire crumbling. Fear, once stitched into every beam of the town, unraveled. The store came first. Dalton's general store, long a symbol of inflated prices and debts enforced by threats, was shuttered. Under Morales's guidance and Walter's urging, it reopened as a cooperative. Jacob Miller proposed it. No man owns it alone. We all share. Marta vowed farmers, seamstresses, fishermen would stock it fairly. And so they scrubbed shelves, filled them with goods, and hung a new sign. Sand Hollow Cooperative. People entered not with dread, but with pride. Next came the school. Dalton had called education a waste, leaving the schoolhouse boarded and broken. But Marta swept its floors, opened its shutters, and rang the bell. Children came running, laughter ringing. Grace and Hope clutched slates like treasure. Lily followed, Rex padding close. Lessons began anew. Letters, numbers, stories. And whenever memory darkened Lily's eyes, Rex nudged her hand, grounding her until she dared raise her hand to answer. Then came the square's first celebration. Lanterns glowed, tables brimmed with bread, fish, apples. Laughter filled the air. At its center stood Walter Grayson, badge in hand. Sheriff Morales's voice carried warm. Some men wear the law for power. Walter carried it for the people. Sand Hollow would not be free without him. Jacob presented a plaque carved Town Elder, Guardian of Sand Hollow. Tears streaked Walter's cheeks as Marta told him, "You never stop protecting us." The crowd cheered his name, and always Rex remained by Lily's side. He was her shadow at school, her comfort at night, her companion at play. Children adored him, but all knew he belonged to Lily. When she laughed again, it was often because of him, nudging her, curling at her feet, stealing her apple. To Sand Hollow, he became more than her guardian. He was their symbol of loyalty and courage. The square itself transformed. The post where Lily had been bound was torn down and burned. In its place grew the Garden of Hope. Jacob tilled the soil. Marta planted sunflowers, because they always find the light. Eleanor brought roses, Dr. Miller herbs. Families added daisies, tulips, lavender. Within weeks, blossoms stretched in every direction. Lily visited each morning with wildflowers in hand, Rex at her side. She knelt among the blooms, whispering softly, "Thank you for teaching me hope." Sometimes her sisters joined her. Sometimes Maria watched from a distance, eyes wet. Always, Rex stood guard, his dark gaze scanning the horizon. The garden flourished, becoming a place of gathering and promise. Children played nearby, couples strolled, prayers were whispered at its center stone, carved with words the town chose together. From fear to hope, from silence to courage. May we never forget. Years later, flowers still adorned it, not in memory of Dalton, but in honor of Lily's courage.
One dawn, Lily laid her bouquet at the stone and pressed her cheek against Rex's head. "It's time," she whispered. Rex wagged his tail, already knowing. She climbed gently onto his back, trusting him utterly. He rose, steady as ever. The townsfolk watched, smiling. Maria pressed a hand to her heart. Walter lifted his plaque in salute. Marta, Eleanor, Jacob, and the doctor stood shoulder to shoulder in the morning light. Rex carried Lily through the square and down the road toward the rising sun. Their silhouettes caught the golden light, the girl tall in trust, the shepherd strong in stride. Behind them, the garden of hope swayed as if bowing in blessing. Ahead stretched a horizon unmarked by fear, painted in crimson and gold. The people of Sand Hollow stood in reverent silence. It was more than a child and a dog leaving the square.
It was a vision of a future rebuilt not by cruelty, but by compassion, justice, and ordinary courage. As the sun climbed, the crowd breathed as one. A new day had begun, and at its heart were Lily and Rex, girl and guardian, riding forward into a tomorrow stitched with hope. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about wealth or power, but about the quiet bond between a child and a loyal dog. German shepherds, in particular, seem born with a heart that knows only devotion. They protect, they comfort, and they remind us that love can be both fierce and gentle. In Sand Hollow, it wasn't strength of arms that saved a town, but the loyalty of a shepherd dog standing firm beside a little girl. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt they understood you better than words could, you already know the gift they bring into our lives. And if you'd like to deepen that connection, there are some wonderful resources out there on strengthening the human-animal bond. I found one that touched me deeply, and I think you might appreciate it too. I'll leave it here if you'd like to explore. Take your time with it. No rush, no pressure. Think of it as something a friend would mention over a cup of coffee. And when you're ready, give your dog a little extra scratch behind the ears tonight. They've been waiting to tell you, in their own quiet way, how much they love you back.